Hello. So welcome to the webinar. This is Perry Claiborne.
And this is Jeremy Utley. Glad to be with you today. So we're going to dive right in. The topic for today is how to make innovation a reality in your work. And the framing that we're going to use for the talk today is actually refuting 4 myths about innovating in the workplace. We find that it's important before beginning to engage in the practices of design to innovate in your workplace to have a right concept of what innovation means and what it requires. So we're going to start by telling a few stories and talking about some common myths that people hold about innovation in the workplace.
So the myths are the lone rogue, it's an easy sell, the customer knows best, and it's a lightning bolt. So these might seem a little cryptic, but we're going to go through them one at a time and tell you a case or a story about each one from our work.
All right, so the first example we want to talk about and the first myth that we want to debunk is the myth of the lone rogue, or the innovator in isolation. We see that many organizations believe that individuals are responsible for innovation and that individuals alone have the inspiration required to innovate, and that's a myth that we want to debunk. We're going to do that by telling a quick story of a good friend of ours named Doug Dietz. Doug is an executive on the global design team at GE Healthcare and encountered us at the D.school about 5 years ago. Doug is responsible for designing many of the imaging machines at GE Healthcare, such as the one that you see on your screen below. Doug came to an executive program at Stanford where we taught many of the principles of design thinking that we teach to executive education students, and we asked a simple question at the end of his class. What do you plan to do when you go back home? What simple activity can you engage in to begin to innovate in your work? And for Doug, who designs medical equipment, his answer was he wanted to go visit hospitals and actually see people engaging with his machines. So Doug did, and the hospital that he actually visited was a children's hospital, just happened to be a children's hospital. Doug had recently won an award for designing a imaging machine that won an International Industrial Design Award, so he's very proud of the machine. He went and spoke with several doctors and nurses, and they all told him what he already knew, which was it was a great machine. It made great scans, and it was the top of its class technologically. But while he was there, and while he was speaking with some of the technicians, one of the nurses came in and said, Doug, I've got to ask you to leave for a moment. We have a patient coming in. And so Doug said he stepped out in the hallway, and as he did, he saw a young couple walking down the hallway, and they were both holding the hands of a little girl about 6 years old. And he said that as they were walking down the hallway, he noticed that the little girl was crying, and she was saying, I don't want to do it, I don't want to go, I'm scared. And her parents were saying, as you might imagine, you can do it, you can be brave, you're going to be strong. He said he noticed that she didn't have any hair, so it's clear that she was undergoing some type of serious treatment. But he said he couldn't figure out what she was scared of. And so anyway, he stepped out of the exam room, and when they came in, when they rounded the corner, and the little girl saw the machine that he was so proud of, the machine that he had won so many awards for, he said that she burst into tears and was overwhelmed with fear. And he watched all this unfold. He watched her unable to keep still, which is very important for the equipment that he's designed, to the point that the doctors had to bring in an anesthesiologist to come in to sedate this little girl. As you can imagine, it was a very traumatic experience, certainly for Doug, but even more for the family that he was watching, and certainly unhealthy for the little girl. He said that in that moment, he went from thinking that he was a huge success to realizing that, at least in this regard, he had failed a user that he was designing for. He said that he wasn't sure whether this case was an anomaly or was straightforward and was the typical case, so he said he started asking doctors and nurses that he knew, hey, how often do children have to be sedated? How often are they scared? And he said they learned roughly 4 out of 5 kids, roughly 80% of kids have to be sedated when they undergo a procedure in one of the machines that he designed. And he was floored by that statistic, as I think any of us would be. He was absolutely shocked that so many of the patients that had to undergo a procedure in one of his machines were so scared that they couldn't keep still and had to be sedated. He saw this as a major opportunity not only to improve kids' lives, but also to improve the bottom line of the hospitals, because it was a major throughput issue for hospitals that have to increase their staffing and increase the time for procedure. So he began to work on the problem, and we're going to cut right to the chase to show what he designed. But over the course of engaging with these kinds of users, he realized that what kids really needed in their lives was adventure. And whereas their brothers and sisters would go to sports camp and would play various sports and spend time outdoors, because of these kids' medical situation and illness, they were unable to engage in the same kinds of activities. And so Doug and his team ended up designing what you see on your screen now, which is a series of devices geared towards infusing adventure into the medical procedures they had to undertake. There are over 20 such machines in hospitals around the U.S. now. It's still a pilot, but what Doug and his team have uncovered is if they can bring adventure into the lives of children, they can dramatically improve the experience for the child and also dramatically improve the experience for the hospital. In the 20-plus hospitals where they've deployed this machine called the Adventure Series, they've brought sedation rates down exponentially. One thing that's interesting to note is this team has not innovated based on a better technology. The product is actually technologically exactly the same. But what they've done is they've completely changed the experience of kids. And in so doing, they've generated millions of dollars of sales for GE and brought patient satisfaction levels up to over 90% from previous lows of in the single digits. In addition, many families have reduced their trauma, obviously, and many kids have had a completely new experience of what it means to undergo a medical procedure like this. The thing that we want to point out, though, is that Doug was not alone. Doug did not do this on his own, in isolation, inspired as a single and innovator, but rather he took our advice and he assembled a team of diverse experts, folks ranging from kindergarten teachers and curators of children's museums and child life specialists. You see, Doug's team had previously only collaborated with itself, a bunch of designers with expertise in industrial design and in mechanics, and they never thought about bringing in outsiders to actually bring a fresh perspective into their team and into their work. And when Doug encountered a new challenge of trying to design for the delight of children who were in terminal illness situations, he recognized that his team was woefully inadequate in terms of the expertise that was resident on the team. And so at our encouragement and instruction, he brought on a radically diverse set of collaborators to help him bring fresh eyes to the problem. He jokes that the GE personnel HR office called asking, "Hey, why do we have kindergarten teachers on the payroll? And why are we employing folks from children's museums?" Because they were unfamiliar with bringing in such a radically diverse team. But what Doug experienced in bringing such a radically diverse team together is that the diversity of perspectives allowed him and his team to see the problem in a fundamentally different way than they've been able to see it before. And what we see time and time again at Stanford is that when organizations are approached with a very difficult challenge, which forces them to draw upon expertise that's beyond the expertise of their team, that forces them to collaborate outside of their neat disciplinary boundaries, oftentimes what's needed is a radically diverse team with a radically diverse skill set. And so lone innovators are not themselves able to sustain and deliver breakthrough innovations, but rather they need to be complemented with diverse perspectives and skill sets in order to deliver breakthrough innovations.
So one more example. This was, we thought, an important topic, and I think one of the things that sort of perpetuates about innovation is the story of the lone inventor. So this idea of diverse teams and sort of reveling in the diversity of the team and different perspectives. And we'll talk about how you make a team like that work in one of the other myths, but for now, just one more quick example. Patagonia is a clothing company. For those of you who don't know it, makes outdoor clothing, down jackets, fleece and wool, and terrific company based in Southern California, founded by the Chouinard family, Yvonne and Melinda Chouinard. Amazing history, founded in the 70s, gives back 1% of its profits for environmental causes, and builds all its products as sustainably as possible. Anyway, the years I was there in the early 2000s, working with a great team, we were challenged with starting a surf product line, and the approach we took was to use design process, but further to put together a diverse team. And this diverse team was sort of gave an interesting product breakthrough. And I want to tell the story just briefly by putting surfers together. For those of you that are surfers, you might recognize the picture. And here's its upper right-hand corner is Jerry Lopez, who's a famous surfer from the 70s. But we also had surfers on the team that were pros at the time, and we had, of course, designers that were going to design the clothing. But the interesting thing is we put, which is not commonly done it sounds very obvious, but we put fabric designers, the people that actually develop the fabrics, on the team, and folks from operations and folks from sales, and all these perspectives mixed together drove a very unique breakthrough. Patagonia produced a wetsuit, which in my mind is still one of the most innovative wetsuits on the market, made with wool. So traditionally wetsuits are made of neoprene, and this is a product made of wool, and it allows the wetsuit to be dramatically lighter, antibacterial, and all these terrific things about it. And it came directly from this diverse team. I remember the fabric designer on the team early on, because he was in that early session of dreaming about what products could be for the surf line and dreaming about the changes that could be made. He also is an expert in fabrics, and very early on had the idea that maybe we didn't have to use the fabrics that were used by everybody else to make wetsuits. Maybe we could try some other ones. So very early on in the development of the product line, this diverse perspective was brought into the team and completely broke the mold for what a wetsuit could become. So as a result, these are the lightest and thinnest wetsuits you can get, and really gave Patagonia a chance to enter the market with something dramatically different, and a direct result of a very diverse team working on it, not the results of a lone inventor. The fabric designer on his own would not have been successful without the team around him. So with that, moving on to the next myth. One of the myths we want to debunk is the fact that innovation is an easy sell. I think that far too often when inventors tell their story, it comes off as it was easy. I made this breakthrough and the world beat a path to my door. I'll tell you a personal story here that I assure you that's not the case. When I was a graduate student here at Stanford, a student of David Kelly's in product design, at the end of your degree, you had to come up with an invention. So I chose, of all things, to invent a new snowshoe. So traditionally, here in the picture, at that point in the early 90s, snowshoes were pretty much all wood and rawhide or nylon, and very heavy, very hard to use. Snowshoeing was not a sport per se. It wasn't something you really did, but I actually got interested in it because I'd broken my leg in graduate school and couldn't ski and decided to snowshoe, and I didn't have a great experience, so I decided to design a new pair of snowshoes. And you can see on the right what came of it was aluminum and neoprene and very sort of high-tech snowshoe with a binding and cleats and all these systems in it. And it was very innovative, loads of patents, all this great stuff. And it allowed people to run in snowshoes. It allowed people to backcountry snowboard. Named the company Atlas Snowshoe Company. Thought the logo, the name was really cool. Decided to build all the snowshoes, and certainly went out to the trailheads and got loads of people jazzed every weekend with these products. But I assure you at this point, the world did not beat a path to my door. I did not make the cover of Fortune magazine. It took many, many years, but one of the critical things with snowshoeing becoming a larger activity was getting ski resorts to allow it and getting the mountain areas that people wanted and had access to in the winter to actually embrace snowshoeing. And you know, you tell the story. It's amazing to me in hindsight to say it took every bit of 5 years to convince the first of the big ski resorts to actually allow snowshoeing on the mountain. It was something they turned away. They thought it was silly. They thought it was going to cause injuries. They thought it was going to slow down the revenues in other areas. And Vail Associates was the first one to allow snowshoeing. This is the first map I kept. We eventually had lots of ski areas added over the years, but it's something I like to sort of use as an example of the persistence it takes these innovators to see their innovations to market and make it happen, and it's not an easy sell. It was a long effort to get snowshoeing accepted, and it wasn't a result of that first inspiration of a wood snowshoe not having to be so heavy and so bulky and making a lighter one. It was a result of an effort to persistent effort to bring it to market and tell the story over and over and over, and finally convince, in this case, a really big operator to allow snowshoeing.
And that's something that we actually hear time and time again as we talk with innovators. It's very easy when those of us who are observing breakthrough innovations coming to market and then hearing the stories told retrospectively often make things sound very simple and very easy. And we're able to retrospectively piece together a beautiful story arc that makes sense to those who are listening. But the reality is when you're looking forward in the face of uncertainty, in the face of the unknown, trying to bring something to bear in the market which has never been done before, all of the forces in the market are against you. And many times, even forces within your own organization are against you. We joke that the antibodies of the organization come out to attack anything that seems unfamiliar and anything that seems as if it might threaten the existence and success of existing lines of business. Even in the example that we mentioned earlier of Doug at GE, he even had trouble convincing his organization that the problem of children and being sedated in imaging machines was a problem worth working on. He actually started by collaborating with a partner hospital because the hospital experienced the problem even more acutely than his own organization did. And so time and time again we see that true innovators, people who are truly interested in disrupting the market, have to be willing to have a thick skin, have to be willing to take a few arrows, a few punches, get a few black eyes and bloody noses, but have to truly believe in what they're trying to achieve. And we talk about empathy and a deep concern for the customer as a way to build that passion, build that inspiration, and fuel the momentum that's required to actually beat the odds inside of your organization and out. So with that, we'll move to the third myth, because there's a lot of talk about listening to your customer, and the customer knows best. And while we wholeheartedly agree that it's important to empathize with your end customer and develop a deep understanding of their needs, we actually believe that it's a myth that the customer knows best. That's a little counterintuitive, so we'll give a quick example that hopefully illustrates the point. In the mid-'80s, Procter & Gamble owns Folgers Coffee. They still own Folgers Coffee, but in the mid-'80s, Folgers Coffee was in a bit of an identity crisis. They did a bunch of market research, and basically, as we hear the story, what came out of the market research is that they learned the coffee category has been declining for 20 years. They heard that young people, they talked to young people, they did focus groups, and the direct quote in the marketing report was, "Young people will never drink coffee." Folgers talked to all their customers, and the only thing they found out was their customers are dying off. And they believed and told the executives of Procter & Gamble that there's no way to make money in this category. That was a direct quote to the board, no way to make money in this category. They obviously did not see the tide shifting, right? And shortly thereafter, Howard Schultz and Starbucks reinvigorated the marketplace and reintroduced a new generation to coffee and the joys and the pleasures of coffee. We think this is an interesting example because it's clear that listening to your customer and believing exactly what your customer says is not always the best way to proceed. And because they approach the problem that way, Folgers and many organizations like Folgers mistook what their customers were saying for the truth. And they believed that their product was about a specific product and rather than being about an experience. And they defined coffee as a product that sat in someone's pantry rather than as an experience that could be wholly redesigned, wholly reimagined, and could become a completely new and fulfilling part of someone's life. And we see that time and time again, that there's this subtle difference between seeking out understanding of your customer and seeking direction from your customer. We believe it's imperative that you seek understanding from your customer, but to take direction from your customers can often lead you astray. So I want to talk about that word, especially empathy, for a moment. The word empathy, the Webster's definition is here, the intellectual identification with or vicarious experiencing of the feelings, thoughts, or attitudes of another. This is something that we talk about much more extensively in our course, in the Innovation and Entrepreneurship Certificate, but we wanted to say a few words about empathy here just to differentiate what it means between taking directions from your customer versus understanding your customer. We think it's very important to get beyond what your customer's saying to understand what they're feeling. Oftentimes market research goes as far as to explain what someone says and compiles a lot of what people say, but rarely does it get into the emotions behind what they're saying. And what we believe is it's imperative that a great designer and great innovator actually infer meaning from what's being stated by a customer. We seek to understand and to gain insights from empathizing with customers, not to gain directives, not to gain direction, but to gain insight that's actually actionable for the team. It's still the job of the design team to innovate. It's not the job of the customer to innovate. Henry Ford famously said, if I had asked my customers what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse. We've all heard that quote, and yet again and again and again we make the mistake of asking our customers what they want. Just because we shouldn't ask our customers what they want doesn't mean we shouldn't ask them what they feel, though. And what we encourage folks to do is to gain a deep understanding of your customers and your users' needs so that you might actually gain a level of insight that allows you and inspires you to do something they could never have imagined to do. We think about this insight as being a combination of observation and inference. Observations are very important, right? We actually do need to go into the marketplace, observe our customers, ask them good questions, ask them what. But just as important is the other part of this, which is making inferences based on our own objective experience, expertise, and uses ourselves so that we might ask the question why and dig deep into making inferences and understanding why. This is something that our late colleague and predecessor Bill Moggridge pioneered, in understanding that insights must go beyond observations. It isn't enough for Folgers just to ask young people if they'll drink coffee. It's not just enough to ask how much longer do we think our existing customers are going to live. What we have to do is go more deeply into understanding the social behaviors and patterns of a new generation to understand the need for connection, the need for identity, the need for a place to connect that's outside of work and home. And leveraging those insights, we can redefine and reframe the opportunity space for our organizations and for our products in a way that we can't if we just ask for directions from our customers. One way that we do this is a simple tool. Again, we go through this tool in much more depth in our course, but wanted to at least expose folks to this. But it's a simple tool as a way to think about unpacking observations from our users. This tool, we call it a user empathy map, but it's a 4-quadrant diagram. On the left, there's specific observable behaviors and statements that our users make. And if you think about going out into your place of work, your place of business, out into the wild, so to speak, out into the field to observe your customers and your users in their day-to-day lives, you can think about bucketing what people say and what people do, and actually cataloging and making notes about what people say, what people do. But then just as importantly, and something that we often overlook, is making inferences, and jumping to the right side of this diagram, making inferences about what people think and what people feel. Oftentimes these are implicit. Rarely are they explicitly stated. Usually they're guesses, but they're educated guesses. And we don't make these guesses for the purpose of flippantly guessing or postulating, but we believe in rapid cycles and rapidly iterating, and as quickly as we can make guesses, getting back in front of our users and customers to confirm our hypotheses. And it's only in this manner of making observations and then shoring up those observations with inferences that we can test, hypotheses that we can test through prototypes and through unexpected interactions with our users, that we can actually break through to unexpected territory.
So I want to tell you one more example with this myth, and want to redeem the Procter & Gamble's folks. We shared the Folgers example. Procter & Gamble is a great example of a company that's adopted many of the methods we teach here at Stanford at the D.school. A diverse team. Claudia Kochka is somebody you look up, who is the VP in charge of the efforts at Procter & Gamble in the 2000s to bring in clear processes around innovation, along with A.G. Lafley, Cindy Tripp, and literally hundreds of people that group trained up to have some of the techniques to drive innovation. And in particular, I wanted to talk about this product that Mr. Clean did. So Mr. Clean is a division of Procter & Gamble, which is in the tens of billions of dollars, huge company. And they were in an identity crisis. They were a liquid cleaners division, and they had plateaued. They were flat as a business unit. And Claudia and her team came in and helped them. And what they did was they went on visits to customers. And they told customers, we're going to come in, we're from Procter & Gamble. We'd like to know how you use liquid cleaners. We'd like to interview you about your how you clean your home and what you do, and did a little bit of the empathy work that Jeremy spoke of, trying to figure out what their needs were and trying to look deeper for their needs. And as you think about that empathy map that Jeremy just showed, on the left-hand side, they observed something. So over and over they would visit homes, and they observed something that the customers never ever said. They observed that the customers had cleaned up in advance of their visit. They had a clean kitchen counter. They had clean floors. And then they went back and they asked a simple question. They asked, why? Why did you clean up? And customers answered very simply, well, of course we cleaned up. We've got visitors. We've got company. And they then sort of dug into the behavior of cleaning floors. And they figured out that, well, liquid cleaners and pulling out an old traditional mop was kind of a drag. And that was their once-a-week cleaning ritual. But indeed, when they were cleaning up for guests or a stranger arriving to do an interview in this case, they would figure out a way with paper towels or some way to wipe their floor up or wipe stains up, to do a very, very quick cleaning. And what resulted ultimately is to their own admission at Procter & Gamble, a huge product. I think over $1 billion product at Procter & Gamble, the Swiffer, which is basically in between pulling out the mop and filling a bucket and truly giving your floor a full cleaning. It's something else you can do with these liquid cleaners that Procter & Gamble is so great at developing. So a great example of an observed behavior and an inference and sort of digging deeper with a customer. They didn't come up and say, what I want is, a handle and a really, really quick cleaning. They didn't design the product, the Swiffer. Those of you who've seen it, it's basically a handle that has a head on it that you can attach, if you will, almost like something like a little paper towel that already has the cleaning solution in it, and then you can peel it off and throw it away at the end. But the customer didn't design this for them. They got the insight by visiting the customers, observing behavior, and inferring from them what they wanted, which was the ability to clean up around the house very, very quickly on demand, these little mini cleanups. So with that, we want to move on to the next myth of innovation. the fact that innovation is a lightning bolt. Too often we hear a story about a breakthrough moment, and the inventor tells the story that this is the aha moment. We would actually tell you that's not the case, that innovation is a process. And this is my favorite product story of all time, the WD-40. Those of you who don't know what WD-40 stands for, it stands for Water Displacement 40. And it's because it was the 40th try at making this lubricant. This is a lubricant product. It's sold throughout the world. It's almost ubiquitous. It's a terrific product. But the inventor took 40 tries to get there. And I think that's one of the myths of innovation is oftentimes when you tell a story about a breakthrough, you tell the story only about that 40th try. We would maintain over and over and over, if we dig into it, it's a result of constant iteration and constant, maybe not lightning bolts, but mini sparks along the way, if you will. Little breakthroughs that build up to that big product or service breakthrough. Failing early and failing often, this is a great graph to look at about how it costs less to prototype early and costs less to try things early and fail early. I would maintain this is the graph, though, for any breakthrough, that any great invention has gone through multiple iterations, multiple tries at bat, and it's little failures along the way, if you will, that each one of these has a little spark, too, that maybe leads up to this idea that there's a big breakthrough at the end of the big lightning bolt, but the result of all these little mini tries along the way is what innovation process is about. And the process we teach at Stanford, we call design thinking, is a series of 5 steps: empathy, define, ideate, prototype, test. Empathize, we spent a bit of time on with one of the myths of getting deep with our users, figuring out what emotions drive their behavior, figuring out what implicit needs they have, and developing some insights. Define is a way of synthesizing all of that information about the customer, developing a clear, what we call a point of view, or a problem statement from that's unique and usually reframes an area. Think of a Swiffer, reframing mopping to these quick cleanups. Ideate is a way of commonly one of the key tools is brainstorming here. Generating many solutions or innovation potential from that problem statement. Prototyping is when you get real and you very quickly build these concepts out. Low resolution prototyping is a technique we really like to see our students use. So how fast can you make something real is a key metric. And then finally, circling back with our user. So just like the blue hex at the beginning, testing is about getting back with the user, learning from those prototypes, almost like probes to learn more about your customer.
Another way to think about this is modulating between 2 different modalities. One is focusing and the other being flaring. Too many times in organizations what we see is that decision-making process and so-called quote-unquote innovation processes are actually just the product of a long funnel, an ever-decreasing funnel. And what we think is very important is for teams to get explicit about having shared values around a process where you oscillate actually between focusing at times, intentionally focusing, but then also intentionally flaring at other times. And we see that great teams do a good job of balancing those 2 modalities, but not only balancing them, being explicit about which modality they're in and recognizing that the modality you're in determines the behaviors and tools you bring to bear on the process. And the tools you bring to bear in order to focus, in order to make decisions, are very different than the tools you bring to bear in order to generate options and to create experiences. And it's very important for creative teams to get comfortable with and fluent with the various tools that they have at their disposal when they're flaring and when they're focusing. Every step of the process that Perry mentioned earlier has very specific tools that can be brought to bear. And it's not so important about a sequencing or an order so much as having a team shared understanding or social covenant, if you will, that there are times when we're going to bring certain tools to bear, and there are other times when we're going to explicitly not use those same tools. Argument is a great example. Criticism is a great example. Criticism and argument are very helpful to make decisions. they're very unhelpful when generating options, generating new ideas. And being explicit about, are we criticizing right now or are we not criticizing right now on a team is critical, because nothing shuts down new idea generation like criticism. But if the team isn't clear on when they're engaging in what behaviors, then we engage all behaviors at the same time, and the result is the same kinds of outputs that we always see. One example we wanted to give quickly in closing is a partner of ours from the class that we teach at the design school called D.Leadership. Hyatt Hotels is a large hotel company, over 500 hotels worldwide. And what we saw is, as our students engaged with Hyatt last year, this is last January, February, we saw that consistency of process was able to bring a radically diverse team from frontline workers who are hourly employees, all the way up through management ranks to folks from corporate headquarters who are coming in to work on the project. Consistency of process allowed everyone on the team to be able to immediately plug in and work together, regardless of hierarchy, regardless of experience or exposure. Consistency of process enabled the team to actually engage in the design process and avoid a lightning bolt mentality, because everyone with their diverse functional backgrounds, with their diverse expertise in the organization, history with hospitality, everyone was brought to a level playing field in terms of behaviors that were acceptable for the team workspace by using a consistent process. And we see this a great example of a radically diverse team, going back almost to the first bullet point, debunking the myth of the lone rogue. It's important, if you're not a lone rogue, that you have a consistent process to engage, consistent language that you use with a radically diverse team, so that you can be on the same page, so that you can speak the same language. But even more than process, the thing that we'll wrap with, and then we'll open it up for question and answer, is having consistent mindsets. There are certain values that we espouse we think are critical to breakthrough innovation. And we'll close with these. But these values we find across all kinds of industries, all kinds of functions, in all different countries even, that a focus on human values is critical, that a bias towards action as opposed to planning or as opposed to talking is critically important. This idea of showing, not telling, letting your work speak for itself. Embracing experimentation, again, as Perry mentioned earlier with the graph, experimenting early, seeking out failures early when they're cheap, rather than waiting to fail until it's really expensive. Radically collaborating, as we've mentioned, bringing in diverse teams, diverse backgrounds, crafting clarity from complexity, not looking for simple answers from our customers, but rather being willing to handle the messy inputs they give and crafting clarity as a team. And then lastly, as we just mentioned, being mindful of process, allowing a shared knowledge of where we are in a process to dictate what types of tools we bring to bear on our given project, what types of behaviors are acceptable on our team. These shared mindsets on a team enable a team to go way far beyond really reach escape velocity and break out of the confines and box that they oftentimes find themselves in organizations.
And at this time, I'm going to take the last few moments and open it up for questions and answers. All right. So our first question is, what innovations are likely to come from the target user versus leading edge users?
Great question. So this is Perry. I think that this is something we talk a lot about at the D.school. We call the once you get outside of your target user group, we look for extreme users. That's our terminology. It's a terrific point here, though, that we absolutely believe you need a healthy mix of extreme users or edge users as you do your empathy work. Let me think. A good example is actually the GE example of talking to children. They're a very, very small percent of the total market for the use of these scanning devices, and it actually shows their needs as exacerbated. So it's much easier to design a solution for that type of user and the need of needing to be entertained, or in this case, the kids needing an adventure and handling their fear and anxiety over the situation is terrific. But I know from talking to Doug that insight applies to adults as well. There is anxiety in adults and normal users of those products. but that wasn't maybe the first emotion that came to the surface if you were to just interview them. But clearly with GE Medical, that's an insight now that will be carried forward in terms of the design for the adult products. Again and again, any one of the examples we used, one of the benefits of that empathy work is actually in terms of using the extreme users, is actually to find those needs. And if you take a look at an edge user, whoever sort of typed that question, it's a terrific question. Those needs are far easier to expose, we find, with extreme users. So great question.
All right, so the next question that we have is sometimes innovative people, because they think differently, aren't facile with the kind of business speak that gets business leaders on board. It would be interesting to hear how you would address that.
So this is a great question, and I think the reality is as you bring innovation back into your work and your job, some of it can be new and scary to the other folks in your office. But we found if you even use the materials in this deck or some of the materials we're going to share with you afterwards, explaining innovation as a process and a process that can routinely drive breakthroughs, I think that to me debunks a lot of this stuff. And realizing that having empathy for your coworkers as you go through the process and explaining a bit of the terminology, some of the diagrams at the end, and we've shown here in terms of explaining what design process is. Many of the organizations and small teams we've worked with, simply being clear about innovation being a process has helped debunk a lot of the myths and solve a lot of the problems of miscommunication with senior folks.
The thing that I would say, just to build on what Perry's saying, is that storytelling is a really powerful tool. It's easy, I think, oftentimes when confronted with a business case question, to feel the need to lead with a business case. And what we see time and time again, both in grad students as well as in organizations, is that storytelling is an incredibly powerful and underutilized tool for building momentum, for building traction inside of an organization. But oftentimes, the business case can be put on the back burner when a compelling user-centered narrative is told, addressing and uncovering critical needs that the user or the customer feels. Even executives, and maybe especially executives, can connect and resonate with a single user story that's told in a compelling and meaningful way much easier than they can with a bunch of extrapolated facts and figures. And so even thinking about how you design your presentation is really critical. We've seen student teams, I think there's been some research done on it. I'm not exactly sure what the outcome is, but I know for a fact that that D.school student teams are way more likely to win a business plan competition or startup competition if they tell a story before they get started, if they tell a story of their user. Leading with the business case, leading with the market opportunity is rarely what truly grabs people's attention, what captures people's imaginations. What captures people's imaginations is when they truly believe there's a problem worth solving and they truly believe that the team knows how to solve it. And I know that the same is true in organizations. If you can communicate the urgency of a problem, the urgency of an opportunity, then the solution will sell itself.
So I'm going to, again, thank Jeremy and Perry for their time. We've had a lot of questions, and so I appreciate everybody submitting them. We're not going to have time to answer them all. We'll try to get to as many as we can. So the next question, how much iteration is needed?
I think that Jeremy would sort of nod in your head. This is a great question. Iteration as much as possible. I think that one of the things we want to make clear about iteration is it's okay to launch products that are not fully complete in our minds. That iteration is constant. Even with products live in the marketplace, we've seen the more nimble organizations able to even in their prototyping process, as they're iterating, push products to market, at least with smaller launches, test things live. Hyatt Hotels in particular, I know if you go to the Santa Clara Hyatt today in California, they're trying mini experiments in their lobby about meeting places and changing the nature of how people use their lobby. They'll be constantly iterating those. They have some really rough prototypes behind the scenes that are not ready to be put in front of guests, but they push things live that are not at all by the sort of, if you will, by the Hyatt rulebook complete and ready for prime time with their customers, but they'll indeed push them live. And I'd say that iteration's a mindset. It's a mindset Jeremy showed on that last slide of embracing experimentation as an organization and a cultural bias to try as much as talk, or hopefully in spite of talking, to actually try it with a customer. And it doesn't mean that we wouldn't see the mistakes or failures as things that are going to stop the project, but things you're constantly learning and really buying into this speed of iteration, that as you learn, you're going to quickly iterate, quickly change, and push forward.
One thing I think that I would say, just to build on that, is that it's critical to start early. I think it's less important to think about how many iterations are necessary. It's less important to answer that question than it is to answer the question, when should you start? And the sooner you start, the less you risk an idea becoming too precious to fail for you. And oftentimes what we see is the longer you marinate on an idea, the longer you think about an idea, the more likely you are to want to insulate it from failure, insulate it from any kind of criticism. And so as soon as you've got an idea, that's the right time to begin to prototype. And as soon as you prototype, that's the right time to begin iterating.
Well, I want to thank him. This brings us to the close of our webinar. I want to thank again Jeremy and Perry for their time and for all of you for attending.